So as I was saying, just as it got cut off there, I think that basically they got a better deal from the Pinckney Treaty than they got from the Jay Treaty. But they probably got as good a deal as they could do from the Jay Treaty, given the disparity in power at that point between the British Empire, which was the most powerful entity in the world, and the American colonies that were far weaker. So I think they got a good deal relatively. And I would say overall, they handled the relationships pretty well. They managed to stay out of a costly war. They got all the territory they wanted. They didn't involve in the war. The only thing they didn't get was economic, and it was predominantly the South that didn't benefit because the West got access to the Mississippi, the North got the trade back and compensation for ships. The South didn't get anything. So in terms of like no access to the West Indies market and like no compensation for their slaves. So would you agree that they handled it reasonably well?
Definitely. I think it would be pretty hard to argue otherwise. I think the
Yeah.
Americans were in a very good, just happened to be in a very good position. I mean, I guess if you wanted to, no, I mean, I'm not going to make that argument. I think that the question is, overwhelmingly tends to saying yes, they did handle them well.
Yeah. And that leads us to our last question, which is why was it such a problem to find a successor to Washington in 1796? So the three things I've chosen was Washington was too great a man to replace, the lack of an obvious successor, and division in the parties and country. Again, you can always form your own factors. I just think these are the easiest ones to do. So I'll start with Washington being too great a man to replace. He'd been the military leader during the Revolution. That's massively important because even though he, as we've argued many times, he lost lots of battles, he was still influential in his ability to organize, stay in the field, keep motivation going, keep morale up, and keep the army alive and in the field. Was vitally important. And I think, like, as in anything, if you win a revolution, if you're the military leader of that revolution, your reputation is going to be really high.
Absolutely. And you're a unifying figure because you're a reminder that, in fact, our enemy was the British, not each other. Before.
Yeah. And in that sense, he's seen as a father figure for the nation as well. Like even in the when they drafted the federal constitution, without him and Franklin's support, it would have been impossible to get it done. They were Benjamin Franklin and George Washington were the only two people that commanded effectively universal respect among all of the Americans. Mm-hmm. His military record was really important, even if, like you said, we lost battles, he won the war. He had no clear political convictions, as we talked about before. I think that's really fundamentally important because his lack of political convictions meant he could stand above the massive load of divides that were dividing that country at the time. And he stepped away to avoid being a new king twice. So he stepped away from that position with the army at the end of the war when the Articles of Federation were set up. And again, after 2 terms, he could have continued. There was no term limit. There was no term limit until after FDR, because it was just precedent that no one was going to take more than 2 terms, because Washington hadn't until FDR decided to take 5. And then they were like, okay, we're going to make it the law that presidents can't have more than 2 terms. But, that was like George III said, if he steps away from power, he's the greatest man that ever lived. And I think very few people step away from power voluntarily. I mean, look how much it took to get Biden to step aside. And Biden's no Washington. So Washington making that decision to step aside because he said, we didn't get rid of one king to elect another one. And he's like, I need to step aside to set the idea of civilian rule. I think is fundamentally massively important. And there was no one else with that kind of, like, I don't think there was anyone else with his stature in the country.
Yeah. A lot of gravitas.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, you want to add anything to that, or you think kind of covers it?
No, I think that's right. And he sets a precedent, right? It's the way that he acts, his behavior, the dignity of the office, all of this basically, I guess, sets the set of expectations for future presidents.
Yeah. And the only other possible figure, and that leads to the lack of an obvious successor. The only other person with that near universal respect was Benjamin Franklin, and he died in 1790. So Franklin's dead, so he's not an option. And then you've got John Adams, who ended up succeeding him, competent, but lacked the stature or presence of Washington. So John Adams was seen as a much smaller figure. A lot of people didn't like him either. I mean, he'd actually kind of drafted the Declaration of Independence and gave it to Jefferson because he said that he was so unpopular that if he wrote it and put his name to it, it wouldn't really be seen in the same way. He was seen as pro-British because of the Jay Treaty. He was linked very heavily with that. Some people still didn't quite forgive him for defending the soldiers after the Boston Massacre either. But it was just in terms of stature, you know, and also he was a Northerner. So I think it was really, really hard. I mean, if you think he was the only non-Virginia president for the first 36 years of the Republic. Because you had Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe.
It's amazing how important Virginia is, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the foundation of the country, and its name gets completely tarnished by the Civil War.
Yeah.
Because obviously Virginia is the capital of the Southern.
Yeah, Virginia could have been on either side in the war. It's only because of literally Lee was a leading federal general, and he only turned because Virginia was on a touch of a dime, and he thought you couldn't force states back into the Union, and Virginia sided up to defend states' rights on that side as well.
That's right.
Yeah, I wrote my whole dissertation undergrad about how Virginia was more important than Massachusetts, but the Northerners winning the Civil War meant they rewrote their history.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So Adams was a Northerner, problematic. He was a Federalist. He was along with Alexander Hamilton on the Federalist Party, problematic as well. Then you've got the other two massive figures, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Of course, Jefferson went on to be president, so did Madison. Hamilton didn't, obviously, because he was assassinated by Burr, well, killed in a duel by Burr.
And discredited by this sordid affair he has with this woman.
Yes, but I'm not
involved in this, like.
I'm not sure that they got it anyway, because I mean, the Federalists didn't win another election afterwards, but yeah, probably possibly.
Didn't help though.
No, it didn't. And he wrote it himself. But Jefferson and I mean, the lack of an obvious successor here links in with the divisions. So obviously Adams and Franklin you can take out for various reasons. Everyone else was on one side or the other. So John Adams and Alexander Hamilton were on one side of the divide. He himself, Hamilton, was divisive. His policy split the country. He was also an immigrant, and his personality made enemies. And Thomas Jefferson was seen as pro-French, and he was also divisive on opposite side of the issues to Hamilton. I think that's where those clear divisions in the country are there. I think only Washington can hold those divisions together because both sides looked at it. I think because Washington was effectively an ally of Hamilton, so the Federalists saw him as one of their own, but because he was a slave-owning Southerner, the anti-Federalist Republicans saw him as one of their own.
Yeah,
he was appointed as the president. He never fought on either side. He never ideologically fought on either side. But the country was literally and utterly divided down the middle. As I said before, we'll pull it up. So there was divisions on the power of the federal government, how the government should be financed to support France against Britain or not, farmers v. merchants. And again, we'll say that there were two clear sides. The Hamilton side was the Federalist Party, whereas the Jeffersonian Party was the Republican Party. Hamilton was pro-business, pro-merchants, pro-trade. Jefferson was pro-farmers, pro-small industry, pro-background. Jefferson was pro-rural, pro-debtor. Hamilton was pro-urban, pro-creditor. Jefferson, pro-French. Hamilton, pro-Britain. Jefferson, pro-westward expansion. Hamilton, pro-Atlantic focus. Jefferson, pro-Southerner. Hamilton, Northerner. Jefferson, pro-slavery. Hamilton, anti-slavery. Literally, they were on every side divided, and the whole country was divided down the middle. And not a single person was like Madison and Burr were obviously on the Jeffersonian side. Adams and Hamilton were on the Hamiltonian side. It was impossible to select someone who was able to do what Washington could do.
Yeah.
But which one is more important?
But hang on, can I just?
Yeah.
So this is just part of my knowledge. But was Jefferson really that keen about westward expansion? Because I remember there was some hesitation. So there's the Louisiana Purchase, right?
Yeah.
So is it Napoleon? He sells massive.
Yeah. Well,
Napoleon
you know what Napoleon said when he's again, this is outside of our course, but it's relevant.
Yeah, this is right. This is outside.
You can't mention it in the essays, obviously, because outside the course. But yeah, Napoleon, when he sold it he realized after the Haitian Revolution they didn't take Haiti back. He was like, we're not going to be able to hold on to this. So he actually said to his foreign secretary, he said, Britain is too big a power. We can't take them on. But if we sell the Louisiana Territory to America, we will create a power that will rival Britain, and in 200 years will take its place as a global superpower.
Nice one, Napoleon.
Yeah, he said that in 1804. So
he's a clever guy.
He was. He knew his stuff. His foreign secretary was Talleyrand. No? Was his foreign secretary? Genius.
Yeah, Talleyrand. He was a genius.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is we're flying off into all sorts of very interesting directions.
So Jefferson. Okay, Jefferson wasn't so much pro-Western expansion as he realized it was inevitable, and he thought if the federal government didn't support it, there was a danger that these people would leave to join Spain or Britain, which they were considering.
Yeah, absolutely. That's more my understanding. I think my understanding was that ideologically, Jefferson stood for a small republic, basically small moral citizen.
But those
farmer,
those westward those Western colonists were the representative of his small yeoman farmer. I mean, no one kind of represented the pioneer spirit that Jefferson wanted America to have than those westward expansion colonists.
Right. But a massive country, I'm not sure how Jefferson, I'm not sure whether Jefferson saw that with a great amount of enthusiasm. Sort of
I don't know, but okay, but if you look
Colossus.
Well, he bought Louisiana, and he was the one who commissioned. He also commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition to get to the western to the Pacific seaboard.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think he commissions Lewis and Clark if he's not thinking about westward expansion to the Pacific.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question is, which one of these is most important?
Yeah. Maybe the divisions. I'd probably go for 3 divisions in the parties.
Yeah, go on, wait.
Or I'm sort of trying to decide.
I'll go first, and then you can run back.
You go first. And then I'll.
I would take number 1.
Right.
Because I think the divisions in the country are there before Washington becomes president. And I think the lack of an obvious successor is why he's selected in the first place. So, I think it is difficult to replace him because there's not a single other person who can stand above the divisions in the country. I suppose that's one way you can say the divisions in the country are the most important. But I think he holds those together. And if there was another Washingtonian figure, then they could possibly do it as well. It depends, I suppose, if you think that these divisions are increasing and becoming fundamentally impossible to control, or whether Washington's personality was fundamental to holding them together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the division is. I think that the division is there. I don't think it's fatal at all.
Yeah, well, it becomes fatal. It leads to the Civil War.
Well, but not between Hamilton and Jefferson.
Well,
it's not this divide. It's not this divide exactly.
Well,
that's later.
Well, the North-South divide is still represented by Hamilton and Jefferson.
Yeah, but it's not in the same. It's not specifically over slavery. It's over. There are 2 different visions of the country. Slavery does intersect with it to some extent, but it's not the focal point specifically yet.
No, right? But it's still very relevant to it, and I think those divides, they do represent the 2 divides in the country that tears the country down the middle.
Well, I mean, I think that the parties reform. They have to reform later on. I think it's in the 1840s, even the 1850s.
Yeah.
In order to now deal with the urgency of the slavery question, but this is not. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
I think there are other really major issues. Whether to support France or Britain, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the questions, and I think the fact that they are divided leads to challenges, but it's not. It's also important for, I guess, also establishing the conventions of American politics moving forward, right? When you have, in fact, two parties essentially that oppose each other, and that yet nevertheless have to share power. Right.
Yep. So which one are you going for in the end?
Look, I actually am tempted by the first one as well. I'm inclined to agree. I would argue that it's Washington's just a unique figure.
Yeah. In history, I think there's just very few people like him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why, I mean, he's revered, but I think for good reason, but less for what he achieved than more for what kind of person he is.
Yeah, that's right. I think if he was, a really brilliant writer or very, an intellectual, I don't think he'd be as great as he is.
No, I don't think so.
I think it's more of a moral. It's a character thing that Washington has, a kind of grandeur, but it's not an intellectual grandeur really. It's kind of respectability.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that he's just.
That's quite hard, isn't it? It's quite hard to have. You don't get many people with that.
No, and he was conscious
that kind of.
He protected it.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that wraps up the American Revolution course. We finished it. We will do some podcasts on the analyzing exam papers, but I think that's it for the content.
Bravo. Well done.